Rotil's night sky washed over their now exposed heads twice before their transport gave out with a loud grumble as the last of its fuel was spent, ending its sprint with a loud hiss of steam that escaped the confines of its engine compartment, obfuscating the remainder of the windshield. Everyone was practically motionless and quiet, the only audible detail among them being their breathing. They had lingered in this state throughout the entire drive, the main exception being Gruba, who on the fly had to extract the slug lodged inside of Katerina's leg, then clean, stitch, and bandage her wound when they came out in the open. Bellowing litanies of wrath and perseverance tore themselves out of her lungs while the Krieger recovered the piece of metal, continuing throughout the entire procedure to mask any unsightly screams. To her fortune, their volume progressively receded towards the impromptu operation's completion, leaving the Commissar fairly taxed, but set on the road to recovery over the course of the now 3-day vehicular sprint. While he had, technically, also been wounded, Gus declined any medical attention for what was a mere scratch, only taking a cleansed cloth to cover it until his blood clotted to prevent more of itself from gushing out. The rest had simply picked themselves an intact piece of wall to lean against, while their commander rested her back on the backside of the front seat. Quietly they simmered, seemingly ignoring the halting of motion, tired expressions fighting the urge to pass out. Approximately a minute after their stop, Kost, the seemingly most composed of the group, who still had his posture straightened in the driver's seat and gaze fixed towards the road, broke the silence with an announcement for Arconi.
"We have run out of fuel, sir."
Any who spared a glance in the Commissar's direction could see her exhaustion be replaced with an almost insulted deadpan, as she tilted her head to the side and up, her view of the Mordian blocked by the seat. Normally, she would have scolded the blatant sass, but her nerves were too strained in this case. Thus, she instead grabbed onto the seat's ridge and pulled herself up to stand, stretching her back with a faint crack, then pointed at Gargota, Richard, Lawrence, and finally Dan, giving out one-word orders, the final of which applying to the two men.
"Russians, refuel, engine.
She looked back.
The rest of you, Overwatch."
Saluting in unison, the designated operatives started going through their supplies for the necessary items and disembarked, save the captain, who immediately stepped off and went over to open the truck up, waiting for the sergeant to bring the Mecha Medicae toolbox over. The entire ordeal was thankfully short, but it did not go as cleanly as she might have preferred, as the quartermaster turned to her before stepping off.
The slug didn't hit bone or an artery, but you still shouldn't put pressure on the leg so early in the recovery process.
Even though she would not show it, Katerina was not at all fond of the burning pain of her wound. She rolled her eyes and waved the Krieger off without responding. Only when he, along with the other guardsmen, set about their tasks, she once more slid down to sit and remove the pressure from her leg, all the while resting her face on the palm of her hand in thought, not seeing that the PDF private had noticed the brief exchange and trailed Johann's back as he walked away. 2 fuel cans clunked empty on the side of the road, while Richard closed down the hatch under which resided the tank. Despite the lingering terror in his mind, his heart still had plenty of space for admiration towards the venerable machine, which had prompted him to speak in thanks to it while satiating its hunger. The private went towards the front of the truck in order to inquire about whether to store or discard the cans when he heard his mechanically adept superior speak.
"I think he is worthy, but I wanted to hear your thoughts as the closest thing to a fellow expert on the matter."
It came as a great surprise to the Brotelian to hear the Mordian, who usually exerted unshakable certitude, seek counsel about anything from anyone other than the Commissar. Him and Dusk must have actually gotten along quite well, Bobson thought, as the Cadian replied to the prompt.
If one of the higher-ups were present, with a gun to my head, I may have denied it. But given the rare freedom to speak my mind, I'm inclined to agree. The bugger has performed above and beyond, so I'd say he's definitely earned it. Doesn't have to be any pomp and ceremony to it. Just personal speech from the heart will do.
Then we are in agreement for the exact name of the promotion?
Most definitely, sir.
Their words had roused Richard's curiosity. Upon their conclusion, his own thoughts stirred with the idea that the pair may have been referring to himself. That would very fittingly account for the more regimented style of their talk, as well as to why it was held in private. He would have further assumed that they might bring the matter up with Arconi until Dan continued.
Pass me the sacred oil vial, then. Let's see, what was the appropriate rite?
Were they about to give him some kind of promotion now? Bobson exclaimed mentally, hearing Lawrence shuffle among the items present with them. Could it be that the commissar had already signed off on this? His brain questioned further.
In light of your exemplary service, unbridled dedication to the Imperium in the face of overwhelming enemy force, you have been judged worthy of ascension.
Expectantly, the young man began to well with pride as he continued to listen.
Despite the grievousness of your wounds, you stand tall, resolute, and continue to serve faithfully.
Wounds? Confusion flushed through Richard, as he had been, at least physically, completely unharmed thus far. Desiring clarification, he momentarily forgot the politeness to not intrude and walked past the corner of the vehicle, asking,
"What are you guys talking about?"
just in time to see Cost pour a handful of the sacred oil over the exposed insides of the machine's engine compartment and add,
In the name of the Emperor, with the blessing of the Omnissiah and the will of the motive force, I, Captain Dan Cost of Glorious Mordium, with Sergeant Lorenz Dusk of proud Cadia as witness, anoint thee with a name. When your expiration is at hand and you return to the halls of the Trinity to be judged, bear your name proudly to the envy of the ocean of nameless machines and revel in your accomplishments. Now rise, noble, reliable convenience.
Ave Imperator.
the sergeant finished, loudly closing the compartment. A slight hiss left the machine at the gesture, as if thanking the pair for the honor they had bestowed upon it. Several moments of silence followed before the two turned their heads to finally regard the newcomer. He, in turn, confusedly stammered out,
You were giving the truck a name?
Yeah? What of it?
Nothing.
Bobson shook his head.
I'm done with the refueling. Should I discard the empty cans, or do we keep them?
Presumably displaying disinterest, the Mordian turned around and walked away, leaving his Cadian counterpart to trail his back until it hid behind the other side of the truck before sighing and instructing.
Just throw them in the back. They aren't any real weight on the tires, and if we come across any intact abandoned vehicles, we'll need something to extract the potential resources.
A single salute was the Brochelian's response as he returned to fetch them. Acknowledging the clasp of the lid as a makeshift signal for them to return, everyone also reassembled themselves back onto the machine. A familiar atmosphere of stoicism formed around them, but it was nothing like their usual disposition. Where once a sense of control reigned, now lingered an attempt to restore said certainty. Its silence would be broken by Gorgota, who voiced the question that was likely on everyone's mind towards Katerina.
So, what are we going to do now?
Not going back to the Underhive, that's for sure.
Dusk mused as he took his seat and leaned back on what was left of the wall.
We were caught by surprise initially, but now that we are aware of them, can we not mount some kind of extermination effort?
Richard tried to reason, gathering a few looks to himself.
There wouldn't be a course of action I would oppose.
Johann quietly uttered in agreement.
Faith demands the death of the Xenos and the mutants.
Ramiel stated flatly, nodding his head in apparent support for the pair's intent.
Yeah, about that.
Gus spoke up.
Well, I'm glad the Helmet Bros have begun sharing a brain cell, and I don't mean to be bringing the faith down, as His Holiness has previously alluded, but this is an incredibly stupid idea. You lot sound like you don't have much experience with gene stealers. I will admit, the fracker with the tentacle face is a new experience for me. But I've seen some of the smaller ones, like the one the bot blew up, tear big knives apart like an Ogren does a ration bar. This squad is woefully under-equipped and incapable of taking their like on. Doubly so if they have fire support.
I understand the intention within your explanation, but what are these big knives you talk about? I recall you also mentioned them when we first set up from the shelter, in reference to the Catachans being able to have handled the Vrax campaign without their involvement. But since no one has explained the details of that campaign, I don't understand the significance of their mention.
The monkey speaks of the Angels of Death, Space Marines.
Katerina's voice grabbed the course of the conversation, along with everyone's attention. Her next words would then turn the atmosphere into ice, injected directly into most of their veins.
And for once I can assure you that he isn't making anything up, because I myself have seen Astartes brought down and torn to shreds by the likes of these cursed aliens.
First to remove her gaze from Marconi was the Armageddon, who instead glanced in the direction they had driven from, a displeased scowl coloring her features.
From what I know about them, they don't like to be known of, until everything is made just right for them. The orcs have either aided or delayed their uprising, but I'm confident in estimating that they will be coming after us in order to silence threats to their existence. Would this estimation be correct, sir?
She turned her head back to the Commissar, who in turn nodded and said,
Unfortunately for us, you are basically dead on the thrones.
It wasn't the suggestion I backed initially, but given the current precedent, strategically withdrawing Overground has risen to be the superior option.
Cost spoke, not turning around to the group, instead still clutching reliable convenience's steering wheel.
Stop wasting air and get a move on then, suit.
Gruber almost mockingly spat at the Mordian.
This inaction is grating, almost half as much as the lack of steel I see on display.
His comrades did not fancy the Krieger's words in the slightest, but before the situation would evolve into something more hostile, the group's wrangler once more yanked back their chains.
Hey! Just because I'm under doctor's orders to not move a lot, that doesn't mean you maggots are free to start shit as you please.
A click of her bolt pistol further enhanced the statement, prompting them to keep down. Once sure of their compliance, Katerina lowered the weapon and instructed.
Before you dirtbags start ripping into each other, you will have orders to fulfill. Private, find that map and take my spot up front together with the first lieutenant and the captain, so you can get us back on the road towards any exit out of this hive. Mandatory shut-eye for everyone else, changing every 2 hours, after which we'll be making pauses for the driver compartment to sleep as well, until we reach a proper border point. Is that clear?
A unanimous "Yes, sir" filled the air as the guardsmen took their positions after a quick sleeping order was established, following which their damaged but still trusty steed was roused from its calm and it rode back onto the highways. Approximately 2.5 weeks later, after having dealt with several small bands of greenskins on the way, the reliable convenience would make a more lengthy halt as the closest gate in the outer wall of the hive finally came into view, along with one incredibly unpleasant discovery. Smog and noise billowed from below their vantage point, nearly obscuring the Hab complex that stood in front of and around the gate, or more precisely, what was left of it. The length and breadth of the artificial valley it occupied in the shadow of the mountain spires was infested by the orcs, with large sections of it transformed by their actions into either factories, breeding grounds for their spores, or scrap heaps. What they had encountered at the Emperor's Springfields now seemed like a mere miniature of this place. When the memory of that battle surfaced, it was followed by the information they had obtained there. Referencing the map and other navigational markers, the squad realized that they had arrived at the location referenced by the orc mech from before. Despite scurrying all over the place, the guardsman's magnocular vision could not identify the aliens as a teeming mass. To their disgust, disappointment, rage, hatred, and in one exception, horror, The bulk of movement was produced by scores of the civilian population, dragged around in chains and bullied by the Orkoids as little better than chattel slaves. Speaking in pure mathematics, the humans had the numbers over the orcs and Gretchen in this case, by a fairly large margin. Infuriatingly, however, somehow they were clearly split off from each other into various groups that did not seem capable of overcoming the bulkier brutish orcs and their diminutive lackeys assigned to boss them around. At least, that is what their observation from afar told them. Turbulently, the various emotions swirled in Bobson's heart and mind. In the prior month he would have doubtlessly let them run amok and burst out of him, but the Brotelian had changed since then. Marshalling his will, he kept surveilling, retaining his composure in anticipation of his comrades' reactions. It would not be a long wait as the sergeant audibly sighed and leaned back from their concealment, lowering his viewing device.
Alright. From what I'm able to estimate, we can either opt for suicidal charge through there, ditch the truck so that we can try to sneak our way to the wall and climb over it, or circle back and hope any other exits are not so, populated.
The Krieger shook his head in a manner that indicated he had also rolled his eyes when more options were given beyond the first. It was a gesture that went mostly ignored, the group attention's initiative falling to the commando's predations.
Most of those would be nice to have, but taking the other slimy variable into account does not leave room for them on our timetable.
Exactly. Time is not a resource that we have to spare. Our head start is likely soon to expire, so we need to be as quick as possible.
We still don't have confirmation that the mutants have launched pursuit. But if we make ourselves known down there, I can guarantee to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we will have a dedicated stream of squeak shit barreling down after us should we survive the breakthrough attempt. And with the state RC is in, even the rambling trash will be able to catch up to us.
Oh, I am plenty sure the purple heretics are on our heels. Sneaking, roundabouting, saving civvies, simply isn't affordable with our current predicament.
The remark caused the edge of the private's lip to twitch with displeasure, but nothing more came of it. Arconi would make a note of that detail as she, now well enough to at least walk mostly normally, passively kept tabs on her subordinates while observing the settlement below, a task to which Richard's dedication yielded a momentary widening of his eyes.
Rather than bickering about what can't be done, why don't you offer solutions?
Ramil growled at the pair.
At least the Cadian offered some, but even I have to say that he should have opted to pour more wisdom into his considerations before voicing them.
Wisdom. That's right!
This time, the Brotelian grabbed the rest's attention, lowering the magnoculars and turning to face them.
I recall a piece of ancient wisdom from Terra that might just be the answer to our predicament.
His face bore a confident smile as he addressed them. His display felt somewhat unnatural to most of them, resulting in a somewhat uncomfortable silence to linger for a little while, until Katerina rolled her eyes with a groan at them and prodded the private.
What? Spit it out, trooper.
Richard, in turn, looked back through the magnoculars, prompting them to follow his guidance. Set Trail had their gazes landing on something resembling a town square, where, towering to about twice the size of the biggest orcs they had encountered so far, loomed what they believed they recognized, their guess being confirmed by the foremost expert on the matter among them.
Damn, you found their war boss.
Gargota then turned to look at Bobson and added,
Good job, kid.
From what I recall of the PDF lessons about the orcs, if their leadership is absent, they fall into disarray. If we can get rid of their war boss, as you put it, and rouse the prisoners to rebel, not necessarily saving them with our presence, the ensuing chaos is liable to give us ample distraction to find and stock up a more healthy vehicle with which to make a getaway. On top of that...
He paused, seemingly trying to rouse insight among them. His intention would succeed as the commissar's eyes widened, looking at the ground in realization as she uttered.
Any pursuing gene stealers would come upon and have to deal with the greenskins, forcing them both to have far more dangerous matters than us to deal with.
Her gaze, accompanied by a smile indicating that she was impressed, lifted itself to the Brotelian, and she added with an approving tone.
Bold. All of those are achievable objectives.
She then regarded Lawrence.
Dusk, prepare the Vox for probing access. We'll try to tap into any intact Vox frequencies in the area.
Through her, optimistic expressions spread across the rest of the squad's faces like a plague. The only one not stricken with it seemed to be the insulated Krieger, who slightly scoffed and asked of the private.
And what exactly is this ancient wisdom from Terra that got you, of all people, to come up with such an alleged intelligent idea?
Richard's smile stretched into a knowing smirk as he replied.
It is a proverb which I recall went something like this. The enemy of your enemy is a body you can put in front of yourself.
Join me, brother Grotz, in liking the video and subscribing the channel. Together we will conquer the algorithm and gather 200 views. Long live the revolution!